I'm Zoe Maeve, creator of July Underwater, and you're listening to the True North Country Comics podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book and graphic novel creators and supporters. I'm John Swinimer. If you want to drop me a line, you can contact me at john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. On this episode, I chat with Zoe Maeve as she discusses her latest graphic novel, July Underwater, and more. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. It's also available on the True North Country Comics channel on YouTube. I invite you to like and subscribe. Zoe is a comics artist and illustrator originally from Toronto who now lives in Montreal. She studied visual arts at Concordia University, where she worked in oil painting, printmaking, and textiles before finding comics. In 2021, her first book, The Gift, was published by Conundrum Press, and she was nominated for an Ignatz Award for Promising New Talent. Her book, July Underwater, which was the recipient of Best English Comic at the 2016 Exposine Awards, was released to a widespread audience with Conundrum Press for the first time this year. The story of July Underwater goes like this. It's a typically sticky Toronto summer, and Lena's spending her first couple of weeks after graduation reading and hanging out with her best friend, Kara. Everything's calm, until she finds out her childhood friend Alicia has died. With her high school friends quickly drifting apart and her parents out of town, Lena tries to make sense of what has happened on her own. Hoping for answers, she turns to Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse and Patricia Highsmith's The Price of Salt. As Lena reunites with her friends for a final party on the shores of Lake Ontario, she finds herself wondering what it means to have known someone, and who they'll all become when they're no longer anchored to each other. And so, without further ado, here's my chat with Zoe Maeve about her graphic novel, July Underwater. So, Zoe Maeve, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Thanks so much for having me.
I appreciate your time. What I usually do to start off the conversation is ask the creator about their first comic book. So, I'm wondering, what was the first comic book that you read?
Probably it would have been Tintin. I was really into Tintin as a really young kid. I had most of them. I was really into Calvin and Hobbes, which is something that a lot of people who make comics tell me that they really, really loved. And another thing that was a big influence, I think, when I was young was the Little Nemo comics, which my parents had around the house, and I was really, really impressed by.
Yeah, lots of good influences there growing up, but I'm wondering who or what inspires you to create today?
Two things that kind of come to mind that I've been really excited about lately are, there was one thing I picked up. I was just at TCAF by an artist called Amanda Vahamaki that's called Pixie Lice. I think it's just totally amazing. It's all done in, I actually don't totally know it's there's definitely some colored pencils here, but it really looks, she's from Finland, and it just really looks different than a lot of stuff that I'm used to seeing, which I thought was pretty exciting. And also one of my other favorite things that I was really inspired by this year was something by the artist Paolo Cataneo. It was called L'été dernier. I read it in French. I'm learning French right now, so I don't totally know if it's in English, but it was, that artist is either Portuguese or Italian. I'm not actually sure, but it also just I found it very exciting because I think it looked pretty different from a lot of Canadian stuff that I see a lot of the time, even though that stuff's also really exciting.
Yeah, it's nice to be able to get out and see different artists. I know TCAF was a great place to do that, to bring people together from all over the world. So that's a great opportunity for sure. And speaking of books at TCAF, yours was the one that was being promoted too, and we'll talk about that, July Underwater. What if we talk a bit about that book, maybe what the story's about, and what inspired you to create it as well?
Yeah, so July Underwater is actually my first comic I made ever. And it's a story about a teenage girl and her best friend. They sort of have a group of friends, but somebody that she knew when they were children has passed away. We don't really know how in the book, but it's sort of her, I guess, coming to terms with sort of both that and how people grow apart from each other and towards each other, and how her life is changing as she's, I guess, kind of finishing high school. And so it's got that. And then it's also sort of bringing in literary references war elements that I was interested in at the time. It's got some Virginia Woolf, it's got some Patricia Highsmith, and I'm kind of weaving those books that the main character is reading into the story. Yeah, so it's not, I wouldn't say that it's like at all an autobiographical book, but it's set in Toronto where I grew up, and I think definitely has like elements that I'm drawing from my life when I was that age and my friends' lives.
Right. Now, you mentioned some literary sources there. Do you think a reader would gain more perspective in the story if they would also read those books separately?
I mean, I think yes, but I don't think that it's necessary. When I was writing it, I was sort of trying to do it in a way that is maybe like guiding the reader through some of those things. It's also a book, like I made it when I was probably 22, so I've been a teenager pretty recently. I would say it's a book that like kind of could be young adult, even though it's not really published as that. So I'm imagining that some of the people who are reading it are probably coming to reading those sort of books for the first time. And I hope they can it can be an introduction in that way.
Sure. Now, you mentioned that this book was originally published some time ago. I think it was 2015, and only this year published by Conundrum Press, which is a sort of a major publisher in the Canadian scene. I want to ask you, how do you feel as an artist looking back at that project that's almost 7 years old? What's your feelings about it?
My feelings have changed a lot. Like, I'll be honest, when Conundrum came to me about it, I was like, I don't know about that. Just because, I think a lot of artists are this way. We finish something, we look at it, we're like, I could do much better now. So it actually kind of took a bit of convincing from Andy at Conundrum, but I'm really glad that I decided to reissue it in the end. I think that I was doing it at a time when I really didn't have a huge amount of control over the materials I was trying to use, which I wasn't super happy with initially looking back at it. But I sort of found things that I appreciated in it as I was just like reformatting the pages and all of that. Yeah, and I think maybe trying to take a little bit of that like looseness into the next project that I work on.
Well, what did you learn as an artist, do you think, since then? Any major sort of things that sort of stand out to you?
Since then, I think that like technically my work has improved, but I think that the biggest leap that I've made is in being somebody who's a writer as well as an artist. I came to comics really from like being in a drawing and painting program. And I think a lot of kind of what I was doing in July Underwater, trying to piece these things I was reading together with little snippets of, a story I was telling, partially sort of came from not really knowing how to write my own story. And I think I developed that like a bit further in my next project. And I'm still learning that and like becoming more confident in how I write things that really are like character driven sometimes and like have a plot, and just feeling like I can do that and use my drawings to tell a story in that way.
Sure. Now, speaking, you just mentioned something about a next project. I presume that's your publication with Conundrum called The Gift that was published last year. I wonder if you could talk a bit about that book and maybe what inspired you to create that one.
Yeah. So The Gift was pretty different from July Underwater. July Underwater, I drew like really fast. I had a grant from the university I was at to like print 50 copies or something when I finished it. And I did it in probably 6 months. The Gift was something I started when I was still in school and then sort of worked on for like a really long time and dropped and picked back up again. But what it is, it's sort of like a historical fantasy horror book about the Romanovs and the end of Imperial Russia. So it's following Anastasia, who's a well-known like historical figure, but there's some sort of unexplained events that are happening around her. She gets this camera for her birthday. No one knows where it's come from. And she's starting to document this world around her as the Russian Revolution is happening and her world is sort of starting to cave in. And at the same time, it seems like maybe something supernatural has arrived with this camera that we don't quite understand.
What inspired you to create that story? Was it just reading about them, or was it a movie or some other book?
It wasn't a book or a movie. It's a little bit hard to remember because I started this quite a few years ago, but I do know that I got really, really interested in like not necessarily the Romanovs themselves, but like people online who were obsessed with the Romanovs, because there's this huge amount of like documentary material, like photographs and menus from the palace, this kind of thing that people have really like put online. And there's a lot of like forums where people are talking about the family. So I guess I like became very fascinated by this world that people were projecting a lot onto, and then it sort of became something where I was using that in a story, and I guess projecting my own ideas onto it.
Sure. Now, talking about a historical event in time that's very specific, I would presume that you would have to do a lot of research in order to, get it as accurate as possible. What sort of research did you have to do?
The research that I did was mostly about visual details. I did read like historical overviews and accounts of what had happened, but I didn't really feel like what I was trying to do with the story, like that was something where I needed to follow that. I kind of let that part go once I had done the research about the events. But what I got really interested in was sort of the details of the world, the costuming, the objects around them. And I focused pretty heavily on those to sort of give the world like the life that I was feeling that the photographs had, that I found so interesting.
Right. I know my young daughters are really big into that Anastasia animation film. They keep going back to that one. I'm sure that's fairly loosely based on historical fact. I guess that what I wanted to say is that this sort of storyline has captured the zeitgeist. Certainly, it's captured the imaginations of a lot of people, and this story is certainly one of that sort of aspects.
Yeah, for sure. I actually kind of avoided looking too much at that movie. Like I'd seen that as a kid, but I just decided I wasn't going to watch it. I wasn't going to really read other fictionalized accounts because there's just too much of it. And I kind of needed to like work in my own space with the project.
Sure. Understood. Well, I want to switch gears a wee bit here and talk about the tools used to create your art. I wonder if you could walk me through your workflow as well.
Yeah, that's also changed a lot over time. When I started off with July Underwater, something that's I guess has been the consistent tool for me has been like brush and ink more than pen, but I also use pen as like where you're literally dipping it in the India ink. But with July Underwater, I was using a lot more mixed media and sort of trying to figure out what worked for me. There's acrylics, watercolors, pencil crayons in there. When I did The Gift, I kind of settled in to a more consistent and limited range of media. I use a lot of dry brushing, a lot of ink still, and then I'll often use, especially like dark and heavy pencils, and then smudge them with my fingers to sort of give a texture to things. And when I did The Gift, I did it with each page, the originals. It's printed in a darker blue and a lighter blue in Pantones for the final printing. But when I was working on it, the dark blue is like one layer that was done on Bristol board, and then the light blue was drawn on tracing paper over top, and then I would scan them into the computer, clean them up, and overlay them as two layers. I really liked the way that like turned out and felt like I hit on something that really worked for me, but it's really time consuming. So now I'm sort of trying to learn how to do a little bit of that with digital, like have the base of what I'm doing be traditional, which is something I'm pretty attached to, but to maybe do, some of the smudging and the texture with digital, because it can just speed stuff up so much.
Yeah, I've heard some people say in the movement from traditional to digital, they lose a bit in terms of the connectivity to their artwork. Do you have any fears about that if you're moving too quickly from traditional to digital?
Not really. I mean, the approach that I've kind of taken is that I'll do a lot of sketches and just sort of casual drawings traditionally, and then I'll play around with how I can like kind of maybe add a second layer digitally. And I think that's working for me right now because I'm not becoming too married to the digital, or I've said that I would, finish up a project using it, and I can kind of just like stick with and post and share what is working. I do worry about it though, because I think that especially doing a longer project, there is like a speed that I need to be able to work with, but I really don't like using the computer to draw.
Sure. No, it's an actual preference of some people. I know that they love having that sort of tactile feel of, hitting the paper, whatever the case may be, with ink or pencil or even coffee, right? So having that sort of, reaction to it, whereas a computer screen, it's kind of alien sometimes. Yeah.
For sure.
I want to ask you about promoting your book this year. I know that we've seen each other at a couple events at the Montreal Comic Arts Festival. We were there, and also at the Toronto Comic Arts Festival just recently. I wonder if you have any other plans for promotion of your book.
Well, we've kind of done, I think, the bulk of it. We've done 2 festivals. I did my first in-person panel at MCAF with an artist called Jake Dion, which was really great, about horror and comics. Yeah, and then I went to TCAF, which is sort of like the big event. So yeah, I think a lot of that we're sort of like the book came out in June, but yeah, we're just sort of continuing to do some stuff on social media. And yeah.
But what was the reaction when you were in person talking to people about your books? What sort of feeling did you get from people?
Oh, you're really positive. I mean, it's been really nice going to the 2 conventions. I haven't been to anything like that in a few years. Like I went because it was digital last year. And then I kind of had a gap. Part of what took me so long to finish The Gift is I basically had a couple of years where I just, because of different things, just stopped drawing completely. So the last time I'd been was 2017. And it was really, really nice to be doing something in person and have, I don't know, people come and say that they read the book and that they enjoyed it. I hadn't really experienced that before, and it was pretty exciting.
I bet. Yeah, for sure. Well, we've talked about The Gift. We've talked about July Underwater. Do you have any other upcoming projects that you can talk about?
Yeah, I'm working on something right now with Z2 Comics. I want to say Z2, but they're American, so I guess it's Z2. Mm-hmm. So they do all comics that are sort of like tied into music, different artists, and they're doing one for the 20th anniversary of Broken Social Scene's album, You've Forgotten People. I'm going to be contributing a chapter to that. It's being written by Lonnie Nadler, which is really exciting. I think that's coming out in September. And yeah, that's the main thing I have coming up that I'm looking forward to.
Great. Good stuff. Well, I'm wondering, for those who want to find out more about your current and your future projects, where do you recommend they go online and through social media to find you?
Yeah, I have a website and I've got an Instagram. You can find me on Instagram at its.zoe.maeve. That's Maeve. And I've also got a website at zoemaeve.net.
Thanks to Zoe for the chat. You can discover more about Zoe on Instagram at its.zoe.maeve and online at zoemaeve.net. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts. And please leave a good rating. Also check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website and follow along on Twitter at True North Comics. True North Country Comics is now on the YouTube. Please like and subscribe to that video channel and hit the notification button. Please send your feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. Thanks again for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2022.